It's nigh on impossible to give an opinion on Mass Effect 3 without referencing the ending. Opinions on the overall quality of the game are all over the place, ranging from terrible to great, but it's near universal that the ending will be mentioned in any discussion. Some people think Mass Effect 3 is a great game up until the final 15 minutes. Others hate the entire game because the ending retroactively ruined the experience for them. Even if the ending isn't relevant, people feel the need to specifically state that to make it clear they love or hate the game for other reasons. An opinion on Mass Effect 3 or even the entire Mass Effect series isn't relevant unless the reader or viewer also knows how you feel about the ending. Your opinion of the ending shapes the context for the entire discussion. So, with that in mind, I think the ending to Mass Effect 3 is decent. I might even go so far as to say it's good. The execution of the ending leaves a lot to be desired, but the resolution to the story and the revelations contained in those last few minutes were a solid way to end the series, while remaining consistent with the themes and storytelling style of the trilogy. To be clear, I'm talking about the enhanced version of Mass Effect 3, which adds to the original ending, and I played with all the DLC, which adds a bunch more context. I wouldn't be anywhere near as positive if I'd played the release version. While I'm making people mad with my terrible opinions, I'm going to throw out another hot take. Mass Effect 2 is the worst in the trilogy, and many of the issues with Mass Effect 3's ending can be blamed on the lack of story focus in the second game. Now you know where I stand. If you don't want to hear my thoughts on Mass Effect 3 as a whole, then you can skip straight to the ending discussion at the time on screen now. There should also be a timestamp in the description. You'd be better off watching the whole thing to keep it all in context, but I would say that, wouldn't I? It's a shame so much of the conversation around Mass Effect 3 is centred on the ending because there's so much more to discuss. Mass Effect 3 is far more linear than both of its predecessors, with less incentive to leave the main story path, and when you do there's little exploration involved. There are no vehicles at all this time around. You go where you're told and do what you're told. It's easy to get swept up in the main story, which is the complete opposite to Mass Effect 2, where the main campaign felt like a needless distraction from all the team bonding. This linearity allows for far more cinematic moments throughout the game, which in turn creates a more intense experience than the previous two, albeit a less replayable one. You can still shape Shepard's personality if you like, however most players are going to be attached to the version of Shepard they built up previously. As such, you're probably not going to shape a character this time around. Instead, you'll watch events play out through the lens of an already established character. Mass Effect 3's high points are the pinnacle of the series, with multiple moments rivaling that epic conversation with Sovereign in Mass Effect 1. Some of the writing is outstanding, and BioWare nailed the closure to long-running stories such as the Genophage and the Quarian dispute with the Geth. Unfortunately, the high quality of these sub-stories isn't consistent throughout. For every story that comes to an emotional and satisfying end, there's another that falls flat and feels irrelevant. The reason for this inconsistency is likely the short amount of time BioWare had to complete its trilogy. Mass Effect 3 released in March 2012, just 2 years and 2 months after the release of Mass Effect 2, and that's accounting for a delay from the original Mass Effect 3 release date in November 2011. Casey Hudson stated that development on Mass Effect 3 began before the release of Mass Effect 2, although it sounds like this was mainly story outlining, with core development work still outstanding on the Mass Effect 2 DLC at this point. Even if we take an outside estimate of 2.5 years, that's not a lot of time to develop such a huge game. Despite being less open-ended, Mass Effect 3 has twice as many lines of dialogue as Mass Effect 2, the result of 2 prior games worth of decisions needing to be scripted, often for multiple characters depending on who survived previous missions. Mass Effect 3 also had an entirely new multiplayer mode that undoubtedly consumed a fair bit of development time. On the other hand, BioWare did develop Mass Effect 2 in a similar time frame, and that required a substantial reworking of the game engine. Still, it's hard to escape the impression that BioWare worked on a strict timeline and that this impacted the game. Before we seek to blame EA for everything, Hudson himself stated that he wanted the entire trilogy to release on the same console generation. Although Mass Effect 3 could have released a year later and still have had a 6-month lead on the new consoles. It's hard to miss some of the more obvious shortcuts taken to get Mass Effect 3 ready for release. However, you could be generous and note how remarkable it is that such an incredible product was created in such a short space of time. Just imagine if this team had been given 4 years instead of 2.5. The result would almost certainly have been one of the best games ever. With such a short period of time to work with, BioWare could be forgiven for carrying over the simple but effective combat system from Mass Effect 2 and not making any changes. The combat was generally considered good enough for an RPG and was a huge improvement over the first game. To its credit, BioWare ended up making a few more tweaks, and the result is that Mass Effect 3's combat is easily the best in the trilogy. Going back through the 3 games, there's a clear sense of progression from the stiff combat of the original, where you could never escape the feeling that you were playing an RPG first and foremost, to the all-out action of the 3rd game, which is almost good enough to stand alongside pure action games of the time. Combat is more frantic than ever on the harder difficulty settings, requiring you to constantly switch weapons and use the full range of your biotic abilities. Shotguns now pack a real punch. Sniper rifles strike a balance between requiring just enough skill to use without the exaggerated effect of swaying all over the place when you're a low level. Biotic abilities are no longer something I have to remind myself to use. They're an absolutely crucial part of the experience, both offensively and defensively, with far shorter cooldowns if you gear yourself appropriately. The cooldown timer for biotics is now dependent on the weight of the weapons you're carrying, so you can sacrifice a wider choice of guns to use your biotic powers more often. In my main playthrough I only carried a sniper rifle and a shotgun, which let me use the biotics a lot. They went from being powers that were nice to use in a pinch to being a core part of my combat strategy. Most encounters started with my vanguard sniping from range and then zooming over to the enemies with a biotic charge, followed up with a quick Nova blast and then a few shotgun blasts to finish them off if they were somehow still standing. There's a huge risk-reward element to all this. Not only does the biotic charge take you out of cover and leave you exposed, the Nova blast consumes all your shield. If you leave any nearby enemies alive, then you'll likely get torn apart. Fights don't just feel good, they often look good. I love sniping enemies through the tiny gap in their shields, however if I missed I could just use a biotic pull to wrench the shields from their hands. The biotic charge can even be used for traversal. If an enemy is on another level, it might be easier to zoom over to them instead of walking around. The enemy AI is still fairly poor, although it's less noticeable because they're so aggressive and do at least make a decent effort to flank you. The majority of my deaths were the result of being caught by an enemy that snuck past without me noticing until it was too late. You can debate the wisdom in the enemy attack routes and their general reckless nature, but at least they put up a fight, and there's a decent amount of enemy variety to keep you on your toes. Fights are typically either against Cerberus troops or Reaper-controlled mutations of other species. Cerberus troops are the straightforward military-style affair. Centurions bombard you with grenades so you can't stay in one piece of cover for long, and engineers set up turrets in case you had any bright ideas about pushing forward. Early on, these fights are a little too easy, even on hardcore and insanity difficulties. Even with grenade spam, you can still stay at a distance and eliminate most threats before they get too close. Things get more challenging with the introduction of the nimble phantoms, who are absolutely deadly if they get up close, which is quite possible given how quickly they move, and there are snipers you can exchange shots with. The wide variety of Reaper-controlled species put up a tougher fight, especially the indoctrinated Asaris known as Banshee. These things are a nightmare. They teleport around to make up ground quickly and have an AoE attack that wipes out your entire shield. Your health doesn't stand up to much scrutiny on the higher difficulties, so once you've lost your shields you can expect to get torn to shreds fairly quickly. Worst of all though, the Banshee also have a one-hit kill. If they grab you, you will die even if you have a full shield and full health. Banshees bring out the best and worst of Mass Effect 3's combat system. Against Banshee you need to stay on the move. If, unlike me, you ignore the DLC until the second half of the game, you'll first encounter the Banshees in a large room that provides plenty of space for you to run from one end to the other as you pop off as many shots as you can before they close the gap and you run away again. This fight was thrilling, possibly one of the best regular fights in the entire series. I wish I could say that every encounter with the Banshees was this good, but not all of these fights take place in large open areas. Once you're in a more confined space, these fights become a nightmare due to the terrible cover system and BioWare's strange decision to have the space button serve more functions than a smartphone crossed with a Swiss Army knife. During combat, the space button is used to sprint, attach to cover, climb over cover, dodge and pick up items. I admire the restraint BioWare showed in not having this also be the aim and move right button, but it's still ridiculous. In any situation where you need to move quickly, such as to avoid a grenade, get behind cover or pick up a special weapon, it's an absolute crapshoot as to what will actually happen. It took me so long to pick up one weapon that I was convinced it had bugged out, and I died countless times because Shepard would interpret my dodges in order to lean against a piece of wall out in the open. Running away was always risky because if a piece of cover so much as enters Shepard's peripheral vision, there's a good chance she'll throw herself against it. Unless you want her to stick to cover, in which case you can be damn sure she'll dive past it or jump over it. It's a real shame that the movement system continually lets you down in what would otherwise be the best and most frantic moments the game has to offer. Instead, moving from cover to cover stopped being an exciting part of combat and became a toss-up as to what would happen when I pressed the button. This became such an extreme and consistent problem that my standard approach to avoid grenades was not to dive from one piece of cover to another, but to use the biotic charge to warp to the enemy who threw the grenade just after it's been thrown. The risk of getting overwhelmed by other enemies was generally less than the risk of accidentally moving out into the open while trying to move to a new piece of cover. Going back to the Banshee fights, there were a few encounters that took place in crowded arenas which were a complete nightmare for avoiding an enemy that can teleport around obstructions that Shepard regularly got stuck on. It's manageable when there's only one of them, but the second more than one Banshee gets involved it comes down largely to luck. Namely, do the Banshees focus on you or your companions? If you get lucky and they focus on your companions, then you're probably okay. If 2 or 3 of them have their sights on you, then you might as well not bother. Overall, the difficulty is comfortable enough with a few spikes as opposed to a constant slog where you regularly bang your head against the wall. Even on the hardest difficulty setting, you can play for hours without dying, however in those 5 or 6 tough moments, you will more than make up for it. On my main playthrough with Femshep, I started on Insanity, which is the highest difficulty, but lowered it to Hardcore for a bit during one of those fights against the Banshee, and a fight against a clone of Shepherd. With Male Shep, I had the difficulty on Normal because I wanted to play as an Adept and go nuts with the biotic powers. The clone fight was the toughest in the game for me. As you might expect, the clone has the same powers as you, and even a supply of Medigel, although it took me an embarrassingly long time to notice that her Medigel counter was on display in the top right hand corner of the screen. I wanted to go all out against the clone right from the start, hoping to take her out first and then deal with the rest. I got close a couple of times, but with all her med packs it becomes a fight of attrition and you won't survive long with all the soldiers backing her up. You're best off killing all the grunt enemies, then the clone's sidekick Brooks, and finally the clone herself. It's no coincidence that this tough fight also takes place in an arena with plenty of stuff for you to crouch behind when you're trying to roll and vice versa. The clone is far from unbeatable of course, although with hindsight I should have done this DLC when I was much closer to max level and had better weapons. The clone can be a touch cheap at times. Unlike my Shepherd, the clone can regenerate shields while being shot, and one death that followed after unloading a shotgun clip into her for no damage was one step too far and led to me lowering the difficulty. During the fight you have access to plenty of Medigel, which is another issue common to the fights on the harder difficulty settings. You always have more Medigel than you'll ever use. Medigel is great for reviving allies and can get you out of tough situations, but I never once ran out even though health doesn't regenerate outside of combat. Your shields absorb a lot of damage, but once they are gone you get torn to shreds, especially on Insanity and Hardcore difficulties. This means you'll rarely use Medigel to heal health. If enemies get through your shields and you take damage, you're probably dead, or will be if you take time to stop and heal. This isn't a huge negative, it just means Medigel is largely redundant on the higher settings, and since you get an XP reward for picking up unnecessary Medigel packs, you can expect to level up fairly quickly. Despite a few hair-pulling moments, I highly recommend playing Mass Effect 3 on the highest setting you can manage. Even on Insanity, most battles are perfectly manageable, with the added tension of knowing that all it takes is for one enemy to get too close and you're dead. Outside of a couple of cheap fights, my deaths were my own fault. I might have let the enemy flank me or accidentally used the biotic charge without noticing I was putting myself in the sight of a turret. At its best, there's an intensity to Mass Effect 3 that few other cover shooters can manage, such as when you're going up against harvesters and getting absolutely bombarded by missiles, having to make split-second decisions about when to pop up for a shot and when to move to a new piece of cover. Truly difficult moments are few and far between, but Mass Effect 3's enemies push back enough to make you feel like you're battling against long odds in a fight to save the galaxy. In Mass Effect 1 and 2 there was always the threat of an impending war, however in Mass Effect 3 that war has arrived and it's hard to ever forget. No matter what planet you land on, chances are it will be a brownish battlefield that is instantly forgettable. In fact, as I'm writing this script I can barely remember what each planet looks like. I remember what I did on each planet and how it played into the story, but the actual levels themselves have all blurred into one. I appreciate the story reason for this, but couldn't these fights have taken place in more beautiful locations? Like the tropical beaches of Vermeer in the first game, or the forests of Aia from Mass Effect 2. The Asari homeworld is a huge letdown, and instead of visiting the Turian homeworld we're limited to their moon. On the plus side, I enjoyed exploring more of Tuchanka and getting hints at what life was like for the Krogan before the Genophage. At least you get to land on the Asari homeworld and the Turian moon. The Elcor homeworld is teased in a side quest, but all you have to do is scan the planet to complete the mission. When you do get to set foot on random planets for side quests, it is abundantly clear that most of them are reused versions of the multiplayer maps, and I say that as someone who didn't even bother to play the multiplayer. I haven't even gone to the effort to fact check it, I'm just that certain. No longer is Mass Effect about discovery, it's about fighting Reapers. The time for sightseeing is over. While it's tempting to excuse the similar environments by saying that war destroys all it touches, it's clearly the inevitable result of time crunch. Nowhere is this more clear than during the drab final battle on Earth. It sounds so exciting on paper. The fight for the future of not only humanity but of the entire galaxy boils down to a battle on the streets of London. You imagine a mixture of infamous historical monuments next to whatever modern monstrosities BioWare imagines would go up in the next 150 years. The London Eye could come crashing down in front of you. St Paul's Cathedral could be blown up, and with any luck the Reapers would destroy the financial district. The potential is endless. What we get is another dark destroyed street where the only colour comes from red telephone boxes, which are apparently indestructible and future-proof despite already being outdated by the time of Mass Effect 3's release. The whole thing screams of something that was cobbled together in a rush, with the red telephone boxes presumably being a pre-built asset that someone shoved in there just so we knew we were fighting in London. The Cockney chimney sweeps were too expensive apparently. I'm amazed BioWare resisted the temptation to have the Queen as the final boss fight with Reaper-infused corgis fighting alongside her. I do understand the rationale in skimping out on the ending. The percentage of players that complete games is surprisingly low, so it's not uncommon for the later levels to be of lower quality than the earlier ones. It's why you often find more bugs near the end of games. It's simply given less attention than the earlier moments that get people all excited and can be used in trailers and promotional materials. Still, when you're talking about the culmination to a hugely popular trilogy, it's undeniably disappointing to see such a lack of care given to what should have been an epic final fight, and I can't help but see it as indicative of the major problems that curse this game throughout. It's not just the level design that's been scaled down, although to what extent the following changes are also down to time constraints is not always clear. Systems such as planet scanning, character builds and reputation options have been tweaked and refined across the series, so while many of them appear more limited this time around, that could be by design, and in some cases might represent an improvement. For example, there's the Paragon Renegade system that I've talked about a bunch already in previous videos. I'm still not a huge fan. Throughout the entire trilogy I've maintained two separate playthroughs, a Paragon Shep and a Renegade Shep. The Renegade Shep has some fun moments, but it's consistently felt like Renegade Shep is not the desired way to play the game, and I often felt punished for taking that approach. Mass Effect 3 dials the system back, and I'm thankful for the changes. In the previous games you earned Paragon or Renegade points as you played, and if you had enough in one category it would open up either Persuade or Intimidate conversation options. In this game your actions earn you reputation points, and it's these points that determine whether you can persuade or intimidate. You still play as either a Paragon or Renegade, but you have the freedom to make whatever decisions you feel are appropriate at the time, so long as you have enough reputation. You no longer have to pick the Paragon option by default just because you want to max out your Paragon bar. The interrupts are still present and they're just as stupid as before. I don't want to harp on about this stuff too much because I did that in the last video. I'll just highlight some of the sillier moments, such as when shooting a camera that was spying on us was considered a Renegade action, even though Arya does it immediately after, and killing Kai Lang as he's sneaking up on you is also a Renegade decision, even though you kill him immediately after anyway. The most frustrating scene for Paragon Renegade decisions is near the end, when you talk with the elusive man. You should be able to persuade him to kill himself, but despite having what looked like a full reputation meter, the options were greyed out. I looked it up online and apparently you can only convince him if you chose the Paragon or Renegade options every time they were available in conversations with him. This was the case with Saren as well in the first game. I went back through my footage and can't find any time I missed this, so I'm not sure what happened. Having failed to convince the elusive man to kill himself, your only option is to kill him via a Renegade interrupt. If you don't, you die and have to sit through this long and unskippable cutscene all over again. As far as I know, this is the only time you absolutely have to use a Renegade option to proceed, and it's absolutely terrible. Another change almost certainly related to time restrictions is the removal of the middle dialogue option that represented a neutral middle ground in case you didn't want to go full Paragon or Renegade during conversations. This had little to no impact on my playthrough because I always found the middle option a bit of a cop out and never used it anyway, but it still sucks to see a choice being taken away from those who would otherwise use it. As I've discussed in previous videos, the Paragon and Renegade conversation options aren't always as distinctive as you're led to believe, and some of them are exactly the same. This has been ramped up to extremes in Mass Effect 3 where many of the conversation options are virtually identical and make next to no difference to the conversation.
You know we're not ready if it is them, not by a long shot.
It's the Reapers, and we're not ready for them. Not by a long shot.
You worked for them. How am I supposed to believe you've cut all ties? We joined forces to take down the Collectors. That's it.
Makes you think I knew?
You worked for them.
I used them to take down the Collectors. That's it.
The restriction in conversation options represents the continued shift away from RPG elements, as can be seen in the ability system, which is frustratingly shallow compared to Mass Effect 1. There's a measly list of skills, and I had everything at maximum long before the end. If you're feeling generous, you can attribute this to it being the end of Shepard's story, and therefore of course she would already have the powers she needs. That can't mitigate the disappointment of having a character that doesn't change much from the beginning to the end of the game in what is still supposed to be an RPG. I had access to all my abilities right at the start of the game, so for the entire 40 hours or so I was just adding bonuses like boosts to damage, duration and range. Not particularly exciting. The system for buying weapons and armour is the best it's ever been, while still being largely a complete waste of time. Your class now has no impact on what weapons you can use, and you can carry up to 5 into the field. one each of a sniper rifle, assault rifle, submachine gun, shotgun and a pistol. However, the more weight you carry, the slower your biotic abilities will recharge. If you're playing a class that relies heavily on biotic abilities, such as an adept, you should only carry 1 or 2 guns, preferably light ones. You can upgrade guns to level 5 or level 10 if you play the multiplayer mode. Upon purchasing an upgrade, you automatically get that new gun equipped. There's no need to mess around with selling guns. The weapon mods from Mass Effect 1 are also back, giving you a little freedom to craft weapons to suit your playstyle and the enemy you're going up against. For example, Cerberus troops use a lot of smoke grenades, so being able to see through smoke is useful in those missions. Once again, you can pick and choose armour pieces to suit your needs, such as ones that buff shields or health. That's all decent in theory. The problem is once again in the execution. Credits are abundant, so it's easy to fully upgrade the weapons you're using and buy nice armour sets. Within 10 hours I had enough max level guns for every squad member and was wearing an armour set that I would keep for the rest of the game. I ended up spending 500,000 credits on a couple of special Spectre weapons later on just because the money was useless otherwise. Mods and armour pieces are found out in the field. The mods were nearly always useless because you continue to find low level pieces all the way through to the final mission. And armour pieces were always useless because I'd purchased an armour set I liked and didn't need them. None of the Mass Effect games have good economies. It's too easy to acquire everything you want with credits, and given that there's a threat to the entire galaxy, it doesn't make much sense to have Shepard paying with credits anyway. There's even one side mission where you need some guns from a trader, but he won't sell them for credits because he knows credits will soon be worthless. He'll only trade them for other valuable items. This is probably how the entire economy should have worked. Instead of selling guns for credits, vendors should demand a rare artifact from their home world or something similar. These missions are already in the game, but you get credits as a reward instead, further adding to the abundance of useless currency you always have on you. Mods and armour pieces should require you to find blueprints and materials which scientists can then use to craft the gear, with the materials being found during missions for those who explore. Credits could then be ignored entirely or reserved for flippant purchases like a better aquarium for your cabin, model airships or a new coat of paint for your armour. Planet scanning has once again been changed. You don't have to scan them for minerals anymore, thank God. Instead, you ping the local solar system to find special items, be they credits, war assets or just fuel. If you ping too often in a system controlled by the Reapers, they will come after you, which despite the fairly ominous music is fairly pointless. There's no death penalty if you get caught, and the whole thing feels like an underdeveloped idea or something that was just thrown in to provide a fake element of tension. Fortunately, you don't spend too much time scanning planets, however the shockingly bad journal will see you roaming around without a clue where to go, in a way that's reminiscent of childhood holidays, when my dad would confidently assert that he'd found a shortcut. He hadn't. I've excused a few of Mass Effect 3's major issues by reference to the time crunch, but that's not a good excuse here given how quickly it should have been spotted and how easy it would have been to fix. The first issue is that new missions just appear in your journal without you accepting them or even engaging in conversation. As you explore the Citadel, you walk past people talking about artifacts they need or people who've gone missing. Even if you're doing something else and paying them no attention, the quest gets added to your log. It's a bit silly, but I can live with it. However, then there's problem number 2. The journal entry doesn't always tell you where to find the artifact, or it tells you the name of the planet you need to scan but not the system it is in. Turns out there are a lot of planets in space. Finding them all takes forever, and in a couple of cases I ended up looking online to at least narrow down the search to the correct system. Which brings us to problem number 3. Not all the systems are available from the start. For more than one of the random fetch missions, I was directed to a system that didn't exist on the map yet. It popped up after completing a certain story mission a few hours later, so the mission should have been withheld until this point. Let's say we finally discover the system and the planet, so we do a quick scan and find the item. Well, you have to make a mental note of it because the journal won't record that information. If you have a lot of missions on the go or dare to take a break from the game for a couple of days, there's a good chance you'll forget which of the generic artifacts you already have and which you don't. Okay, so let's assume we found the system, the planet and the item. Now we just need to give it to the person who requested it in the first place. Usually you're told what part of the Citadel they are on and they appear on the map so you can easily find them. However, that is not always the case. Be prepared to explore the entire Citadel every time you want to hand in a quest. Finally, some fetch quests have to be completed during specific missions. If you fail to get the required items, you can't go back to the planet to find them, and the quest won't clear from your journal, so you're stuck with it for the rest of the game. Most discussion of Mass Effect 3's story is focused on the ending, however it's actually the beginning which is the biggest disaster. Pretty much everything about this is wrong, although a share of the blame needs to be placed at the feet of Mass Effect 2. If you played Mass Effect 2 but skipped the Arrival DLC, then you'd be forgiven for wondering what the hell is going on at the start of 3. As a quick recap, in Arrival, Shepard managed to stop the Reapers from arriving in the Milky Way by destroying the Mass Effect relay they were due to travel through. Destroying the relay caused a massive explosion that wiped out a major Batarian colony. Shepard was relieved of her duties and forced to stay on Earth to await trial. If you didn't do the DLC, then you're on trial for your work with Cerberus. Mass Effect 3 starts with the Reapers invading Earth. The huge attack that the 2 prior games set up is suddenly underway. The leap from Mass Effect 2's campaign ending to this moment is so abrupt I'm amazed BioWare didn't get sued for whiplash injuries, and it makes me all the more frustrated with Mass Effect 2's main story. It had an entire game to lead up to this moment, and it completely failed to do so. All BioWare had to do was include a brief post-credits teaser showing unusual activity around Earth's mass relay or something similar. Anything to show that the moment of truth was near. Instead, the story not only needs to deal with players who haven't played any Mass Effect games before, it also needs to consider those who have played the main games but not all the DLC. The opening has some decent moments I suppose, but I could never escape the feeling that we were on Earth solely because the marketing team wanted to push its big Take Earth Back narrative in trailers. We leave Earth after this prologue and don't come back until the finale. I'm not convinced it adds anything, and it detracts from what should otherwise be an epic moment at the end as we finally step foot on Earth after around 100 hours of playtime. Anderson stays behind on Earth to help the Resistance, which requires a bit of explaining because in my playthrough Anderson is supposed to be humanity's representative on the Citadel Council. However, in the third game it's Udina, regardless of your choice at the end of Mass Effect 1. You have to dig into the codex entries to read a line about how Anderson got fed up with the council and quit. The Retribution novel goes into more detail. Anderson had to walk out on the council to help Kaylee Sanders track down a man called Paul Grayson. This won't mean anything to you if you haven't read the books, but the brief version is that Cerberus captured Grayson and performed experiments on him with Reaper technology. He became incredibly powerful but was under Reaper control. It made sense for Anderson to prioritise this, especially given his close relationship with Sanders, but the fact it's not explained in the game is obviously a failure on the part of the developers, and it's not a satisfying solution to what felt like an important choice at the time. BioWare never treated this choice especially seriously. Even if you imported your Mass Effect 1 save for Mass Effect 2, you had to confirm your choice of counsellor because the save file is from before you made that choice. Mass Effect 2 does little to acknowledge the difference in the choices, so I guess the writing was on the wall for this one. After leaving Earth, Shepard heads to Mars to be reunited with Liara, who is investigating a Prothean relic that may hold the key to beating the Reapers. There's no real explanation for why this crucial information was only just discovered, other than Liara saying that the urgency has increased everyone's focus a bit. I guess it makes sense, I generally work better with a deadline too. The solution is a device called the Crucible. It's something the Protheans were working on but didn't complete in time to use against the Reapers before being wiped out. Crucible development starts straight away, however there's a missing piece known as the Catalyst, and no one knows what it is or where to find it. This constitutes our main MacGuffin hunt for the rest of the game. The Reapers didn't just hit Earth. Most major planets are attacked and the Council can't deny the existence of the Reapers any longer. That doesn't mean you get all the help you need though. Every species has its own fire to put out, typically defending its home planet from Reaper attacks. You need to help them out first before they will join you in a consolidated war effort. While it would be nice to think that all species would put their differences to one side now that the Reapers are here, it does make sense that they need to deal with their own mess first before contributing to a major battle. The goal is to get your military strength as high as possible before the final mission, and it must be above an arbitrary minimum. Completing the main missions helps bring on board major assets like the support of entire armies, however nearly every bit of side content helps as well. Even scanning planets often reveals an artifact or downed ship that adds to your war assets. Your war assets are multiplied by an effectiveness rating to give you your effective military strength. This bit is annoying as hell because it starts at 50% and never budges unless you play the multiplayer. However, you're never told this and are left wondering how on earth you increase your effectiveness. It's a silly attempt to get you to play the multiplayer, which, wouldn't you know it, contains microtransactions. Other than that, the war asset system is fine. It makes more logical sense than Mass Effect 2's system, where you needed to gain the loyalty of crew members so they don't get shot while picking a lock. While Shepard's motivation is to gain allies for the final battle, the player is likely more concerned with resolving long-running side stories like the Genophage and Quarian Geth conflict. These are some of the best missions in the entire trilogy. The standout has to be the conclusion to the Genophage storyline, which takes place over multiple missions and varies quite a bit depending on your actions in the prior games. Even after Malon's experiments in Mass Effect 2, it turns out there's still one surviving fertile Krogan female, and Mordin, assuming he's still alive, leaks this information to Rex, assuming he's still alive, and you set out to rescue the female from the Solarian homeworld, develop a cure, and then release it over to Chunka. If you let Malon live, he's now working on Omega trying to make up for his past mistakes. If you kept Malon's initial research data, then the fertile Krogan female will survive the tests that result in the genophage cure, otherwise she dies. The Solarian leadership doesn't want you to cure the genophage, and their support in the war is conditional on you spreading a fake cure instead. The only person who'll notice is Mordin, so you'll have to kill him. Rex and the others will be none the wiser, so you can watch them celebrate knowing that it means nothing. Obviously for my Paragon Shep, curing the genophage was the obvious choice. The Solarian reluctance to curing the genophage is even more interesting when you learn that, despite initial impressions, the Solarians may never have approved of the genophage use in the first place. During the Citadel DLC, you watch a bunch of archival footage which includes the final meetings of Turians and Solarians from when the genophage was released. The Solarian representative doesn't give approval but is restrained by the Turians, and the genophage is released anyway. Everything to do with the genophage is fascinating. It could easily be the main story to a game by itself. To spread the final cure, Mordin must travel to the top of the shroud on Tuchanka. It's a one-way trip and he knows it. This scene is incredible, if not at all subtle. Watching Mordin walk towards the shroud as the music kicks in is one of the most heart-wrenching moments of the series.
No other option. Not coming back. Suggest you get clear. Explosion's likely to be problematic.
Mordin, no!
Shepard, please. Need to do this. My project, my work, my cure. My responsibility. Would have liked to see how it ends. Sure you'll do fine without me.
I'm sorry.
I'm not. Had to be me. Someone else might have gotten it wrong. Genophage cured. Krogan free. New beginning. For all of us.
Over the course of 2 games, Mordin transformed from a cold individual who defended the genophage with flawless logic and not a single bit of compassion, to someone prepared to give his life for the future of the Krogan race. It's wonderful, as is the reaction from Rex, who practically makes you an honorary Krogan and promises that future generations of Krogan will not make the same mistakes. I appreciate BioWare's efforts to give you options in this story, however I wouldn't trade this ending for anything. The Renegade version is simply inferior by comparison. You have to shoot Mordin for a start, and Rex isn't there because you killed him back on Vermeer. Renegade Shep is supposed to be the guy who does whatever is necessary and is not necessarily a bad person. These cold-blooded murders have always felt out of sync with that, no matter how desperately the game tries to justify them. The other incredible side story concerns the conflict between the Geth and their creators, the Quarians. You'd think preparing for war with the Reapers would keep people busy, however the Quarians thought this would be a good time to attack the Geth and take back their home planet. The Quarians had the Geth on the back foot, fighting for survival, so the Geth turned to the Reapers for help. The Geth agreed to let the Reapers take control of them, inserting Reaper technology in the process, which helped the Geth fight back and destroy many of the Quarian ships. If you remember, the Quarians live entirely on ships without a planet of their own. Their lives are fragile and the loss of ships threatens their entire species. The Quarians need to deal with the Geth before they can help against the Reapers. First you need to turn off the signal that lets the Reapers control the now incredibly powerful Geth. Assuming he survived Mass Effect 2, you'll find Legion being used to boost the signal. Legion helps you deactivate the weapons that are bombarding the Quarian ships, and to repay him for his generous act, the Quarians, or at least one of the rogue commanders, bombards the Geth ship with missiles, nearly killing Shepard in the process. You then need to destroy the main transmitter, which means killing a Reaper while on foot. You use a targeting beam to help the Quarian fleet hit the Reaper weak spot as it's about to shoot. That's the easy part. Resolving the dispute between the Geth and the Quarians will require sacrifice. Legion wants to upload a code to all other Geth that will give them individuality, whereas Tali and the Quarians are strongly against it. A Paragon Shep can let Legion complete the upgrade and broker a peace between the 2 races. Unfortunately, Legion must sacrifice his own life in the process. There's a touching contrast between Legion's life ending and Tali seemingly just beginning.
Believe it. I don't think it's really sunk in yet. The home world. My world. You've heard me say Kila Salai? The best translation I can come up with is by the home world I hope to see someday.
Looks like you're seeing it today.
The living room window will be right here.
Shepard Commander, I must go to them. I'm sorry. It's the only way.
Legion, the answer to your question was yes.
I know, Tali. But thank you. Kila Sanai.
The Geth and Quarians agree to share the planet, and Tali pictures a new home, looking forward to the day she might be able to leave her suit. Contrast this with Tali's suicide if you don't help the Quarians. There's also an optional quest where you enter a Geth program which provides flashbacks to the very creation of the Geth, and that fateful moment where one of them asks if they have a soul. We also see some Quarians sacrificing their life to defend the Geth. These moments are captivating and a credit to the writing in both this game and the previous two which led to this moment. On a smaller scale, there's a mission with Samara, assuming you played as a Paragon and saved her and not her daughter. Samara shows up when you visit Lezus, which happens to be the home of the monastery where all the Ardat Yakshi are required to live. Samara's remaining two daughters are here, and one of them sacrifices her life to save the other as the Reapers attack. And I couldn't leave out Jack, who has probably the most memorable character arc across Mass Effect 2 and 3. She's gone from being a psychotic killer that you broke out of a high security prison to a teacher and role model at Grissom Academy, a school for young biotics. Far too often character growth is presented at such extremes that it feels more like a personality transplant, but that's certainly not the case with Jack. The changes seem natural and consistent with her character. Given what she'd been through when you first met her, it's easy to understand why she acted so selfishly. Likewise, it's easy to understand why she is now more mature and cares for her students. She's still on the chaotic end of the spectrum, mind you. Other companions play a smaller role, but I appreciate the restraint shown by not forcing them into other parts of the story. There's a nice moment with Garrus when you go shooting together, and plenty of sweet scenes with Ashley as she recovers aboard the Citadel and debates whether to become a Spectre. I romanced Trainer this time around, although given that we'd been together for all three games, I felt the closest connection to Liara. We never hooked up, but she was without a doubt Shepard's best friend. I can think of many games that let you pick a romantic partner, but I can't think of many where you form such a close friendship. Having finally got an army together, Shepard needs to find the catalyst. The Asari are getting battered by the Reapers and decided now might be a good time to share the news that they have a Prothean beacon on their homeworld of Thessia which could be of some help. The beacon is another Prothean VI like Vigil and Ilos in Mass Effect 1. This is another lovely bit of world building because it turns out that the Asari have been using this Prothean intelligence for years and keeping the information to themselves. It's why the Asari are so technologically advanced and were the first to find the Citadel. The Prothean VI called Vendetta is about to tell us what the catalyst is, when Cerberus pops up in the form of assassin Kai Leng, who takes Vendetta back to the elusive man. Kai Leng is utterly pathetic and unnecessary. He's supposed to be Cerberus's greatest assassin, and yet whenever we see him he's borderline incompetent. This silly space ninja is completely different to the version of Kai Leng we see in the books, where he is sensible and intelligent, known for his discretion, quite an important skill for an assassin. In the game, however, he sends an email to Shepard to gloat about his victory over her on Thessia. Not so discreet. Between the books and the events here, Kai Leng has been upgraded with Reaper tech and indoctrinated by the Reapers, but that should make him more efficient, not less. Fortunately, Specialist Trainer, who essentially replaced Kelly Chambers in charge of communications, managed to track Kai Leng to the Cerberus HQ. As an aside, Samantha Trainer also replaced Chambers as my love interest. I made sure to seal the deal this time, I wasn't going to make that mistake twice. Cerberus's involvement in Mass Effect 3 requires a bit of explanation. The short answer is that they are just here to give us a different enemy to shoot at. I'm convinced that's the reason. Despite attempts to link them to the main story, you could easily remove Cerberus and lose little other than a few needless distractions. Fortunately, we aren't working with Cerberus this time around, so there's no need for leaps of logic to justify supporting a terrorist organisation. Shepard makes a weak attempt to excuse her actions of the last game by saying that she was using them and not the other way round. In Mass Effect 2, Cerberus at least had the same goal as Shepard and the Alliance. They wanted to defeat the Reapers and safeguard the future of humanity. Enemy of my enemy is my friend and all that. In Mass Effect 3, Cerberus wants to control the Reapers, ensuring not only the survival of the human race, but its dominance over all other species in the galaxy. This doesn't sound quite so out of the blue if you've been reading the novels, particularly Retribution, in which Cerberus uses Reaper tech to convert a man called Grayson into a superhuman who ends up getting controlled by the Reapers. While that experiment didn't work, it's possible to imagine Cerberus continuing to work on the technology and maybe even perfecting it. Although, like I said, that only really works if you've read the books, and you shouldn't have to read the books to understand what's going on in the game. Cerberus ends up working with Councillor Udina to invade the Citadel with the goal of killing the Galactic Council. The invasion of the Citadel is an easy way to reuse assets, but it's an important battle which brings the war home to those who otherwise live in comfort. No one can ignore the war with the Reapers now. As an aside, the Citadel in Mass Effect 3 is the best it's ever been. It's positively teeming with life now. You can't move anywhere without eavesdropping on a conversation, and every time you return to the same place, you'll get little updates on what those people are doing. A couple of these were surprisingly touching. A mother is looking for her son and becomes convinced that the Asari helping her is the one who was going to be her daughter-in-law. The Asari ends up going along with it. Another Asari helps a woman get her child off-world and reveals that the Asari keep databases of non-Asari partners of other Asari. We already know that the Asari like to mate with other species to keep the gene pool diverse, and I love that we get another little sliver of information to add to our knowledge of this species. Finally, there's a girl who keeps checking in at the refugee camp to look for her parents. Her parents are clearly dead, and the Turian working there doesn't quite have the heart to break it to her.
No, it's not that. I'm fine.
Ah, I see. So, any news?
No, their shuttle must be real slow, that's all. Do you think they're okay? They promised they'd come get me, no matter what they had to do. It's been so long.
I don't know, kid. I'm sure they'd be happy knowing you're safe.
It's just, I miss them. I miss them so much.
The previous games had these little side conversations as well, but I don't remember any of them developing over time like this, and they certainly weren't as touching. After the attack by Cerberus, the Citadel shows signs of damage, although it's mainly superficial. However, there are nice touches like the hospital being much busier after the attack. The hospital is also the location for a touching goodbye to Thane, who finally succumbs to Kepral's syndrome, assuming he didn't die in the previous game. His son will also be by his side, although the precise nature of their relationship again depends on your previous choices. Thane is a complex character, part ruthless assassin who sees himself as a tool and doesn't take responsibility for his crimes, and part grieving widow left to wrestle with his role in his wife's death, all the while knowing that his time is limited. There's a lot of talk online about senior writers leaving BioWare between Mass Effect 2 and 3 and how that led to a drop in the quality of the writing. We'll get to the ending shortly, but when I look back to moments like Mordin and Legion sacrificing their lives for the greater good and Thane saying goodbye to his son while finding time to say a prayer for your own soul, I can't help but strongly disagree that there's a drop in quality.
Kolyat. Why did the last verse say she?
The prayer was not for him, Commander. He has already asked forgiveness for the lives he has taken. His wish was for you.
These moments could have fallen flat. A character death isn't automatically impactful without good writing, but these moments hit hard because the writing is still fantastic in places. And on that positive note, let's talk about the ending. I'm going to give a brief summary of how things end in case you've forgotten or simply never played it. After attacking Cerberus, Shepard discovers that the catalyst is in fact the Citadel itself. This marks the second time the Citadel has been part of the big reveal, with the other being the discovery that it was to be used to open the door for the initial Reaper invasion back in the first game. The Reapers had been hoping to keep this a secret, but now that the secret of the Citadel is out of the bag, the Reapers close it up and transport it to Earth. Yes, it does seem a bit strange that the Citadel can move to Earth so easily, but with all that Mass Effect technology out there, I can live with it and we aren't told that it can't move. There's a Doctor Who episode where the TARDIS literally tows the Earth back to our solar system. This is nothing. The Crucible was transported to Earth as well, so now we just need to hook the Crucible up to the Citadel and see what happens. The Citadel is closed up to resemble a bullet, I guess, and the only way in is via a Reaper beam on Earth that is teleporting people directly into the Citadel as part of the Reaper's harvesting of humanity. Before the climax, you can talk to all your companions who are either on Earth with you or accessible via a long distance phone call. It's a nice moment, and given the events at the end of Mass Effect 2, you know there's a very real chance you might never speak to them again. It's not the same as directly fighting alongside them all, but I enjoyed it as a way to say goodbye to some friends. I've already mentioned the big Earth battle. It's largely disappointing. There's one vaguely cinematic moment where you're running to the beam, but cutscenes kick in just as it gets tense. Shepard makes it to the beam and is transported to the Citadel, as is Anderson. The elusive man is here as well. This scene is memorable for all the wrong reasons. It's a mess. For starters, I have no idea how Anderson got in this room. He seems to have been teleported up to the Citadel at the same time as Shepard, although I don't know how he managed that either, and he describes arriving in a different place. However, there's only one entry into this room, so Shepard and Anderson should have been able to see each other. The elusive man's arrival at least makes a little more sense given that he's clearly been indoctrinated by the Reapers. We already knew this, or at least strongly suspected it, because back on Thessia the Prothean AI referred to Kai Leng as being indoctrinated. It doesn't take a huge leap to assume the elusive man is as well. He also upgraded himself with some Reaper technology, which is uncharacteristically stupid for him. From the experiments Cerberus conducted on Grayson in the books, the elusive man should know full well that Reapers can take control of humans once they have Reaper tech in them. Either by suicide or Shepard killing him, the elusive man dies and you get one final moment with Anderson. It's a short conversation, but a special one nonetheless. Anderson was the one who recommended you for the position of Spectre. He was one of the few people to trust you implicitly when no one else was ready to accept the truth about the Reapers. He also played a major role in 4 novels and has enough in his past that there are likely 10 other books that could be written about him. My only wish is that he'd been more involved in the second game instead of having Shepard take her orders from the elusive man. Anderson dies from his injuries, but not before telling Shepard he's proud of her.
We're almost through this.
You did good, child. You did good. I'm proud of you.
Thank you, sir.
It's another perfectly handled death scene that shows BioWare still had plenty of talented writers on board. When most people talk about hating the ending, it's everything that happens after Anderson's death that they are referring to. Shepard is near death herself when the floor raises her up to the top of the Citadel with all the religious subtlety of Superman floating in space with his arms outstretched in Man of Steel. Shepard is greeted by an AI who's taken the form of the child Shepard saw die back on Earth and later dreamt about. We finally get the big reveal, the reason why the Reapers kill off all civilized life forms every 50,000 years. The AI was created by an unknown race millions of years ago with the remit of ensuring the future of organic life in the galaxy. From witnessing countless species evolve, the AI came to the conclusion that all organic life eventually creates synthetic life, which in turn always ends up going to war with its creators, and this war would eventually wipe out all organic life in the universe. Therefore, the AI decided to eliminate developed organic life forms and synthetics before the problem became so big that it would cause the extinction of all organic life entirely. The AI created the Reapers to do the legwork and decided on a 50,000 year cycle. If this logic sounds absolutely insane, then well, we'll get to that. But in the meantime, it's worth remembering that Reapers do not kill all organic life. Humans existed the last time the Reapers arrived and wiped out the Protheans, as did an early form of the Hanar, the Asari and the Rachni. The AI believes that the creation of synthetic life eventually leads to the extinction of all organic life and sees its solution as a preferable alternative. The AI then gives Shepard a choice of 4 options. First, she can destroy the Reapers, however doing so would also kill all the Geth and EDI because they have Reaper tech in them, as does Shepard herself. Second, Shepard can opt to control the Reapers. We don't get much information on how this works. Shepard would die, but her spirit would somehow be incorporated into the AI. No one else would die under this scenario. Third, Shepard can merge organic and synthetic life by rewriting the DNA of everyone in the galaxy, so that everyone becomes part synthetic. This would prevent there ever being a war between synthetics and organics because everyone would be part synthetic. Again, this would kill Shepard, but no one else would die. Finally, you can tell the AI to get stuffed and watch as the Reapers destroy Earth and the rest of developed life in the galaxy. Regardless of your choice, a few details of the ending vary depending on your effective military strength when you started the battle. The size of your army dictates whether Earth survives the battle and in what condition, and whether the crew of the Normandy survives. When you look at all the possibilities, there are about 10 different endings. You then get a bunch of images showing the consequences of earlier decisions, such as Krogan with babies if you cured the genophage, Samara with her last surviving daughter, and your name potentially being added to the wall of dead crew members on board the Normandy. There's only one outcome where Shepard survives, and that is if you opt to destroy the Reapers and have an effective military strength of roughly 3,000. This number used to be a lot higher, and without the DLC it was tricky to achieve. Few players of the original would have seen this ending. If you do, you see a quick glimpse of Shepard breathing amidst the rubble. So that's it. That's the infamous ending to Mass Effect 3. There's a lot to discuss, but first I should point out something obvious. You are allowed to dislike the ending. Nothing I say from here on out means you can't have your own opinion on it. I don't love the ending myself, I just don't hate it either. There's also a crucial difference between the idea and the execution of the idea. The execution of the idea was terrible on initial release, and while it has been improved with an enhanced edition and DLC, it is still lacking in many places. However, I maintain that the core idea of the Reapers being an entity that kills advanced lifeforms to ensure the long-term survival of organics is a decent enough way to end the story. So, one more time for those who didn't hear because they were banging too loudly on their keyboards, you don't have to agree with me about the ending. Let's start with something we can all probably agree on. The execution of the ending in the original release was bad. It was clearly rushed and incomplete. I failed to believe anyone at BioWare wanted to release the ending this way. This wasn't the execution of an artistic vision. It was a scramble to complete a commercial product in time for release. Nothing will convince me otherwise short of video footage of the concept meetings, and even then I'd be highly skeptical, in the same way I am when I see footage of UFO sightings or people having fun watching baseball. The original edit lacked crucial information, such as explaining how the companions, who were with you on Earth, ended up back on the Normandy and what the hell happened to everyone fighting around Earth. The last one wasn't just an annoying omission, it was a huge plot hole. When the signal goes out to destroy all the Reapers or control them or convert everyone's DNA, the Mass Effect relays are shown to explode. We know from the Arrival DLC in Mass Effect 2 that an exploding mass relay will destroy everything in the system. Does that mean Earth was destroyed regardless of what you chose? Was everyone stranded around Earth unable to return home following the destruction of the relays? What about planets near other Mass Effect relays? Some of the issues can be explained away. For example, perhaps the Mass Effect relay in Arrival only killed the Batarian colony because of the way in which it was destroyed by an asteroid. The explosions at the end could be more akin to controlled detonations. Regardless, I don't blame people for being confused and annoyed about the lack of clarity here. I'd wager the developers at BioWare were just as disappointed as the players. This can't have been what they wanted people to see as the culmination of their trilogy and at least 8 years' work. Fortunately, BioWare released a free enhanced ending which improved things a lot, as did the DLC. First of all, there are many more endings to show what happened to your crew and people you met along the way, and it clears up a few ambiguities, like the cutscene showing your crewmates getting rescued on Earth to explain why they are on the Normandy. Mind you, this edit is clunky and actually ruins the pacing of the run towards the beam. The Normandy's escape has also been re-edited and looks a lot better. The enhanced edition makes a few tweaks around the edges, but it's the Leviathan DLC that completely recontextualizes the big reveal about the AI that invented the Reapers. The Leviathan DLC contains a couple of lengthy missions where you hunt for clues and use the information to track down a piece of technology that the Reapers seem intent on destroying. Shepard finally tracks down the Reaper tech, which happens to be deep underwater. Using a mech suit you traverse the ocean depths, and even though there's no real risk, it does feel appropriately foreboding. Over the course of the trilogy we spent a bunch of time exploring different worlds, but walking on the ocean floor feels more alien than most. Eventually you come face to face with what looks like a Reaper, except it's not, it's a Leviathan. What follows is essentially an exposition dump, however it's so utterly compelling that you don't want it to ever end. The history of the Mass Effect world is fascinating, and yet with the exception of the Protheans we know little about all the cycles that came before ours. Now we are face to face with what is effectively the original dominant race in the galaxy, or at least that's what we're told. Leviathans were the dominant race of their time. They had the ability to influence other species through their thoughts, and they used this to rule the galaxy. Other species were left to their own devices so long as they were obedient, however the Leviathans noticed a pattern. Organic races always ended up creating synthetic races and eventually gave them artificial intelligence. These synthetic races always ended up going to war with their creators, and those wars threatened to spill across the entire galaxy. It was a pattern, or cycle if you prefer, and the Leviathans were unable to stop it. Eventually the Leviathans decided to create an AI to solve the problem for them. The result is what they call the Intelligence, which is the AI we met aboard the top of the Citadel. The Intelligence was given the mandate of preserving organic life in the galaxy and decided that the best way to achieve this was to harvest their DNA and wipe them out before they created a synthetic life that threatened the entire galaxy. Unfortunately for the Leviathans, the Intelligence saw them as a threat too, which is actually pretty apt because the Leviathans did create an incredibly dangerous AI. The Intelligence created the Reapers to do the work on its behalf and modelled them on the Leviathan. The first ever Reaper was Harbinger. Some Leviathan hid from the Reapers and used their ability to control other species to hide evidence of their existence. While the Leviathan don't particularly care about helping the galaxy anymore, they do desire revenge on the Reapers and agree to help in the battle. If you play this DLC before completing the main game, the end reveal that the Reapers are controlled by a powerful AI that seeks to preserve life isn't a surprise at all. The reveal isn't out of left field, and it's easier to digest as a result. I'm not intending to excuse the original ending here. The Leviathan DLC is so important that it should have been part of the main game, and there are still major issues with the ending. For example, why can't we ask the AI questions? Such as, if I take control of the Reapers, does that mean I can order them to self-destruct? Which would achieve the same end as the destroy ending without the need to kill all synthetics. When making videos, I typically try to stay away from online discussions about the games I'm covering. Looking at other people's opinions has me second guessing myself, and I'm always worried I might accidentally copy something I hear without proper attribution. However, in the case of Mass Effect 3's ending, I decided my argument would be better if I directly addressed the main complaints that I don't completely agree with. This meant doing a deep dark dive into internet comment sections and watching a couple of cringy clickbait videos. I hope the result is worth it because I will never be the same person again. I repeatedly saw 3 major pieces of criticism directed against the ending. That the logic behind the Reaper attacks was fundamentally flawed and didn't make any sense. That the ending was a huge thematic shift and therefore inconsistent with the rest of the trilogy. And that the ending didn't properly incorporate your previous choices and made them largely meaningless. I disagree with most of this. Let's start with the logic behind the Reapers wiping out advanced life forms every 50,000 years. It's certainly easy to make fun of this at a surface level, which means it's a great fit for memes, such as the Exhibit 1 mocking the logic of preventing organic life being killed by synthetics by using a synthetic life form to destroy organics. Like many memes, this oversimplifies the issue and misses the entire point. Like I said before, the key point is that Reapers do not destroy all organic life. They only destroy advanced organic life. In the last cycle, the Reapers wiped out the Protheans and presumably many other races, but not humans, Asari, Hanar, Rachni, etc., who were still in the early stages of development and nowhere near capable of creating synthetic life. The Intelligence, and therefore the Reapers, work on the assumption that advanced life forms will always create synthetic life, and that synthetic life will always end up rebelling against its creators, which it sees as inferior. However, synthetics won't stop there. Synthetics will multiply at unprecedented rates and kill all species in their quest to dominate the galaxy. Eventually, synthetics will wipe out all organic races, not just the advanced ones. I know it sounds like a bunch of crazy assumptions, but it's not difficult to imagine. There are already debates about AI in the real world, and plenty of our own science fiction shows AI eventually rebelling against its masters. The only leap of logic I'd question is that after destroying its creators, the synthetics would then go on to wipe out other life forms, but I can just about live with it. If we accept this logic, then it's reasonable for the Intelligence to wipe out advanced life forms. I can't remember where I first heard this, so forgive the lack of citation, but imagine if we created an AI with the primary goal of preventing further climate change. Given complete freedom, the first thing the AI would do would be to kill all humans, because we're the ones causing the majority of climate change in the first place. Of course, humans presumably wouldn't be so stupid as to create an AI with complete freedom. We would put in place an Asimov-style don't kill humans rule. But those are never as straightforward as they sound. How would an AI interpret such a rule? Any major action it takes is bound to lead to the loss of at least one human life, even if it saves hundreds, thousands or millions. What if the AI developed an efficient public transport network to replace cars? Let's say the network is incredibly safe compared to cars, but some people will still die occasionally in accidents. Is the AI allowed to let a few people die to save the many? If so, is it allowed to directly kill if that would save lives? Again, this is a very real conversation. It's the modern day equivalent of the trolley problem. Should an AI-controlled car risk killing a pedestrian to save the life of the driver and the passenger? What if there is only one person in the car and 3 pedestrians? How comfortable would you be in a self-driving car knowing that it might take action resulting in your death if it will save others? What if the driver is 18 and the pedestrian is in their 90s? Should the car account for the future of the 18-year-old over a 90-year-old who has lived a full life? The point is, putting rules in place like save organic life forms but never kill anyone isn't easy to program for an AI. When considered on a galactic scale, it's perfectly feasible that an AI could decide that the best way to protect organic life is to kill all advanced life forms every 50,000 years. It's a stretch, I'll admit that, but this is science fiction. It's a universe where we have to believe in all sorts of crazy technologies and what is essentially space magic. It's part of a story where Shepard can be brought back from the dead after 2 years, and even out of all the options available to her, pick Kaidan as a partner to romance. Compared to dating Kaidan, the Intelligence's solution to its mandate of preserving organic life isn't that far-fetched. I also need to address one of the most commonly cited reasons for the Reaper logic completely falling apart. It's hard to find any discussion of the ending without finding someone claiming that we've proved the entire Reaper logic wrong by bringing about peace between the Geth and the Quarians. In a Paragon playthrough, you negotiate a peace between the Geth and the Quarians and show firsthand that synthetics can live in peace among organics. Therefore, you've broken the cycle that necessitated the creation of the Reapers in the first place. The intelligence is wrong and should leave us all in peace. I completely disagree and believe it's a mistake based on our general inability to conceive of huge periods of time, and a tendency to focus on the here and now. Let's zoom out a bit. The Geth have been around for 300 years. It's true that Shepard recently negotiated a peace agreement of sorts, however there's no telling how long this will last. Furthermore, following Legion's actions, the Geth are now far more sophisticated with a sense of individuality based on the Reaper upgrades. The fact that there is peace in the moment does not mean the cycle is broken. The Reapers invade every 50,000 years, and the extinction event itself takes hundreds of years to complete. The entire period the Geth have existed for is barely a rounding error on that scale. Just because there has been peace for a few minutes doesn't mean that synthetics won't still end up destroying organic life. The Reapers don't arrive at the last possible moment to save the day. The 50,000 year cycle seems fairly arbitrary. Presumably the intelligence considers that time period regular enough to prevent the elimination of all organic life. The circumstances of any present moment are completely irrelevant when considering cycles of 50,000 years. The Reapers take hundreds of years to kill all advanced life, they aren't concerned with last minute peace treaties. And let's not forget that the Geth aren't the only synthetic life form out there. Cerberus has been working on it for years and it created EDI, an artificial intelligence, despite there being a galactic ban on the creation of AI. What are the odds that a rogue group within the Asari and Turians have done something similar? The Asari haven't exactly been forthcoming as we saw on Thessia. Are we really saying that just because the Geth and Quarians have behaved themselves for an afternoon that we've proved millions of years of history wrong? This desire to place extreme importance on the present is only natural. Players want to take ownership of what they've accomplished, and being told that a cycle is unbreakable is frustrating, and something we can't easily wrap our heads around. However, to say that we have proven the Reapers wrong is absolutely not the case. When it comes to predicting the future on a galactic scale over tens of thousands of years, a peace agreement that's been in place for 5 minutes is as insignificant as this video is to the entire internet. I referenced Isaac Asimov's robot novels earlier, but it's actually his Foundation novels that make a great case for this. The entire foundation of the novels is that a group of futurologists can accurately predict the future, but only on a large scale. It's impossible to predict what any one individual will do. However, when looking at millions and billions of people, it's possible to predict patterns, such as an upcoming 30,000 year period of struggle. The Foundation predicts cycles, and for the most part there's little that can be done to break out of those cycles. It's a similar logic to financial advice, such as spreading your investments out across a lot of assets, instead of dumping it all into one place. Individuals are more erratic than the whole. In defending the Reaper logic, I'm not trying to argue that this is a great resolution to the story or that it can't be questioned. However, I will argue that the events of the game do not prove the Reapers wrong. Next up is the supposed thematic shift at the end. There's no denying that meeting the intelligence is a little jarring. You're probably expecting a final boss fight and there isn't one. There's no obvious Paragon or Renegade option. You don't have your teammates alongside you even though you've rarely been alone in the trilogy. This all leads to the ending feeling a little off, and from there people have concluded that it's thematically inconsistent. I disagree. Everyone's going to interpret the theme or themes slightly differently. These things are always open to interpretation in stories, and even more so in games when the nature of the gameplay can contribute to the theme or even be a theme itself. The theme is very much in the eye of the beholder, so my opinion holds no more weight than anyone else's. It's even more complicated in Mass Effect because I'd argue that these games do not have one consistent theme, and regularly bounce around between different ideas. The ending fits with many of the core themes of the series while also ignoring others. When people discuss the overall theme of the trilogy, they appear to place a lot more emphasis on Mass Effect 2 than Mass Effect 1. For example, an often cited theme of the story is one of companionship, and the ending ignores this by focusing entirely on Shepard. Compare this to the ending of Mass Effect 2, which was a team effort and the strength of your relationships with crew members determined who survived. However, the first game didn't have any moments like this. Companions played a support role similar to many other RPGs. They helped you shoot stuff but didn't determine the ending. Another common theme I see mentioned is one of choice and how you don't really have one here. Well, obviously you do have a choice, but it's a different type of choice to the ones you usually make. There doesn't seem to be a clear Paragon and Renegade option for a start. I'd argue that the destroy option is the Paragon choice and the control option is the Renegade choice, but it's not clear and is certainly up for debate. What is clear is that there's an obvious dissatisfaction with the choices available, and while not many people come out and say it directly, a lot of players clearly wanted a happy ending. Maybe I'm being a bit unfair in my reading of random online comments, but you can tell that people wanted an ending that would constitute a clear win state, whereas what they got was a bunch of shitty options. As I said, I believe the destroy option is the Paragon choice and it meets the end goal of destroying the Reapers, the thing we've been working towards the entire trilogy. But it also has the most drastic consequences, killing all the Geth and Edie in the process. The control option lets everyone live, including the Reapers, but leaves you with the feeling that you didn't accomplish your goal, and with the knowledge that you aligned yourself with Cerberus. Synthesis could be seen as a happy ending, but I found it hard to force such a drastic decision on the entire galaxy. All choices were flawed, and the good choice was perhaps the hardest of all to make. This sure seems inconsistent with the relatively happy ending to Mass Effect 2 where everyone can live. But personally, I can't think of a more apt ending to a series that forced me to leave a companion to die in the very first game. There was no way to save both Ashley and Kaidan. I also watched Mordin, Legion and Thane die in front of me. The story of Mass Effect 3 is that all progress comes at a cost. With that in mind, the ending hardly seems inconsistent. Everyone will view Mass Effect through their own lens, which will be blurred by their own personal experiences. There can't be one particular theme for the series because reasonable minds will differ. I only wish to make the point that the ending can be seen as thematically consistent under certain theories. I see the trilogy playing out under three main themes which are all represented in the ending choices, some better than others. There's the importance of working together and overcoming our differences, what it means to be alive, and indoctrination. Shepard starts out working for the Alliance, however to stop Saren she has to work with other species. In the second game, Shepard works for Cerberus, a pro-human terrorist organisation. However, even they see the situation as so desperate that it requires temporary cooperation with other species. The entirety of Mass Effect 3 is about getting everyone on the same page to fight the Reapers. Humanity can't do it alone. While it sounds a little cheesy, Mass Effect is essentially telling us that we all have our own strengths and weaknesses, but are stronger together. This is seen throughout the side stories as well. The whole Genophage story is about trying to restrict diversity due to fear of the Krogan, and you can even look to things like the Asari deliberately choosing mates from other species because they want to diversify their genetic line. When species don't work together, it often causes problems, such as the Quarians creating and then going to war with the Geth, or the Asari keeping the Prothean artifact on Thessia a secret. We all need to work together, so would it be better if we all had more in common? Do you believe different species will inherently seek to look after themselves first and foremost? If so, perhaps synthesizing everyone to be part synthetic would encourage us to work together. Throughout the series, you're regularly tested on your respect for non-organic life, in particular the Geth. Are the Geth truly alive? There's plenty of evidence to suggest they are, even before Legion's actions on Rannoch. Quarians created the Geth but terminated them when they asked whether they have a soul. Geth worked with the Reapers because they saw the Reapers as God. You could even question Shepard herself. Mass Effect 2 starts with Shepard brought back to life after being left as basically a brain on a stick. Is she still the same Shepard? She was dead for 2 years after all. What about her clone? Were the Geth alive when they were a collective conscience? What about after they gained some individuality? Does that change anything? If so, why? Is Edie alive before getting a robot body? What about after? Paragon Shep treats the Geth as people, and Renegade Shep doesn't. This is a crucial part of the entire trilogy. The ending once again tests your beliefs. Most people will want to destroy the Reapers at the end. After all, that's what we've been trying to do for about 100 hours at this point. However, destroying the Reapers means destroying the Geth and Edie because they have Reaper tech in them. Would you make the same decision if the choice involved killing all Asari or Turians or even humans? Or is it actually the case that despite playing as a Paragon the entire time and paying lip service to the idea of Geth being people, you actually see them as lesser beings not worthy of equal protection? I chose the destroy option. If the facts had been slightly different and the destroy option would have wiped out all human life, I might have gone with the control option. So I guess I'm not that much of a Paragon after all. The idea of control and indoctrination has also been a consistent theme throughout. Indoctrination is one of the main tools at the Reaper's disposal, and plenty of other species have a similar ability, such as the Leviathan, Rachni and Thorian. Being able to turn this around and use it against the Reapers feels incredibly fitting. The control option doesn't exactly come out of the blue either, because Cerberus was looking for a way to control the Reapers instead of destroying them. Overall, the indoctrination stuff does feel a touch abandoned. It came up so often that I felt sure it would play more of a role at the end, or that we would find out why so many species seem to have the same ability. But control over other life is undeniably a recurring theme, and it's represented in the ending. The last major complaint I saw repeated frequently was that the ending does not give enough weight to choices you made during the course of the trilogy. I don't want to write this one off entirely, because it certainly could have been done better, and BioWare set themselves up for ridicule with the way they presented the final choice and the fact that all the endings look the same with just a different colour scheme. It's easy to see where this criticism comes from. In that final scene, you are given a choice of 4 possibilities, 3 in the original edit, and you're free to pick any of them if you have a high enough effective military strength. It doesn't matter what you did about the Genophage or the Rachni or the Geth. It doesn't matter whether Ashley's alive or Kaidan, or who survived the climax to Mass Effect 2. None of that determines your ending, or at least it doesn't if you consider the ending to be only the last 15 minutes. I know it sounds like a cop-out, but I consider the entirety of Mass Effect 3 as the conclusion to this story. This is the third part in a trilogy. It's only natural that subplots start getting wrapped up before the final scene. You can't save everything for the last 15 minutes. This is one criticism that makes me a little annoyed, because it does a huge injustice to the incredible writing beforehand. When people complain about the lack of payoff for your choices, did they not see Mordin sacrifice his life to end the Genophage, or watch Legion die to ensure the survival of the Geth race, or reunite with Jack at Grissom Academy? These scenes were some of the best in the trilogy and wrapped up long-running plot threads. It's weird to me that people complain about not getting payoff just because it didn't technically happen in the last 15 minutes. I'm not too sure what people were expecting here. Was there supposed to be a different ending for every set of decisions you made throughout the game? Should every conversation option be taken into account to give you your own personal ending? You only need a basic grasp of maths to realise that's frankly impossible. So presumably it's fair to restrict it to just the major decisions, but most of them are taken care of. The major omission to me is any consequence for your decision on what to do with the collector data at the end of Mass Effect 2. I'm also a touch disappointed with the Rachni questline and the use of Malon's data. This again comes down to an issue of execution. These parts could have been better incorporated into the relevant missions, but it wouldn't have made any difference to the eventual ending. Nothing in the previous games suggested that the decisions would have a significant impact on the ending. In fact, we're consistently shown that our choices dictate the nature of our experience, not the precise story events, especially when carried forward from one game to another. If you killed Rex on Vermeer, the result is that there's a different clan leader in Mass Effect 2. The same storyline is still there, you just deal with different people. It comes down to what you value. Are decisions only important if they directly impact the ending, or can they change the experience in some other way? For me, there's a huge difference between negotiating a peace between Geth and Quarians that allows them to share their home planet going forward, and watching Tali commit suicide as the Quarians are wiped out. Okay, it doesn't affect the final scene, but it's still a decision with important consequence. If player expectations seemed a bit out of line, well, BioWare didn't help themselves in that regard. Fans of the series have dug up plenty of examples of BioWare employees saying things about Mass Effect 3 while it was still in development, and that led to accusations of the fans being lied to. If you follow online communities, then you'll know that lying to the community is basically a war crime, except with lying to the community people actually demand punishment. The timing and context of the statement doesn't matter, the responsibility of the consumer to do research before spending money doesn't matter, and all other evidence to the contrary is considered irrelevant. If any reading of any statement can be translated as a lie or worse, an insult to the community, then you can be sure there will be an angry forum post about it. In the case of comments about Mass Effect 3's ending, it's mostly a bunch of marketing puff statements that don't mean anything when you look closer, or are taken completely out of context. There's a post on GameFAQs titled BioWare's Lies Condensed, and it's quite frankly laughable. Examples of the lies include stuff that no one should take seriously, like, quote, experience the beginning, middle and end of an emotional story where the decisions you make completely shape your experience and outcome, end quote. I've no idea how that's a lie, and you really shouldn't be getting mad at marketing puff like that anyway. Have you ever seen marketing materials describe the product in less than glowing terms? This is just the crap people say when promoting a new product. Regardless of what happens in Star Wars Episode 9, I don't imagine many of the promotional materials will state that the ending of the trilogy is really bad and that people will feel let down. Then there's general comments from developers like, you the fans are creating the Mass Effect experience as much as we are, and how the fans are the co-creators of the series. Again, I don't see how that's a lie, although it is deeply disappointing to hear. I don't want fans to be the co-creators of the story, especially not judging by the dribble you see online. I want the artists to create the work they want to create and the customer to experience it. So to the extent we shape the experience, it should be in the ways intended by the developers through the choices they provide. Video games are art, that should be beyond dispute at this point. However, this kind of crap doesn't help the conversation. You don't often hear authors or directors talk about how fans are shaping the experience. Those mediums have a little more confidence in their artistry and don't feel the need to pander to fans quite so often. It would be a lot easier to convince people of the artistic value of video games if developers were allowed to stick to their own artistic vision and deliver on it instead of constantly worrying about fan blowback. There is one major comment I've not yet discussed, and that's one by Casey Hudson, who in an interview with Game Informer said that the endings would be sophisticated and you wouldn't be able to say how many there were. He said it wouldn't come down to a choice of choosing between A, B or C. This led to another popular meme because of course on the face of it Mass Effect 3 did end with a choice between 3 options. It's perfect for a meme. Nice and straightforward and an easy way to get angry at a developer and convince others to feel the same way. And yeah, it was a stupid statement to make. I've no idea why Hudson phrased it in that way. He set himself up for ridicule here. Hudson's statement wasn't prepared, he was speaking off the cuff, but he should have been more careful. I'd still argue that he's right in spirit because everyone's story ends differently. Outside of the major choice, you then have the situation on Earth to consider, the fate of the Normandy crew, the future of the Krogan, Quarians and Geth, plus variations depending on your romantic partner if you had one. Very few people will see the exact same resolution to the story if you look outside the big choice at the end. If this all sounds too superficial, then again I'd have to wonder what you were expecting. The decisions have always played out this way. Nothing you did in Mass Effect 1 changed Saren's fate, however it affected the exact nature of it and who was on your team at the time. No matter what you did in Mass Effect 2, you still defeated the Collectors. The choices only affected the fate of your crew. The major decisions only ever affected what happened outside of the main events without changing the outcome itself for obvious reasons. It's the same in Mass Effect 3. This is fairly common in games, even ones lauded for their freedom in decision making. What happens at the end of Fallout 1 isn't the culmination of every decision you made in the game. There's a few dialogue options and some stat checks and you choose how you want to resolve the situation. The end of Mass Effect 3 lets you make huge decisions regarding the future of the galaxy. I'd say that's more than sufficient. Fallout 1 gave you slides with one line to describe the outcome of other decisions. Mass Effect 3 does much the same in the enhanced edit. This is another one of those complaints that I can sort of understand when looking at the original cut, which was bereft of information, but with the extended cut you're shown more than enough to feel like your story is complete. Both developers and consumers need to take some responsibility for this mess. Developers and publishers need to stop using bullshit quotes that don't mean much anyway, and consumers need to be more skeptical. I cannot count how many times I've seen people say a variation of "this is wrong because the developer said so." Stop believing everything you hear, especially in the lead up to release. To quickly address a few more complaints, a lot of people really hate how the intelligence takes the form of the child that Shepard saw die. He got the nickname Star Child. I don't get the anger here, it's just a projection. Yes, there are people closer to Shepard that the intelligence could have chosen, but then it would be like speaking to that person and not an AI. Imagine if the intelligence took the form of whoever you let die on Vermeer. It would feel like you're talking to Kaidan. The child is a good fit because you hardly spoke to them, but they still left an impact on Shepard. The dream sequences themselves are terrible, and perhaps that's where the hate comes from. I'd guess the dreams were added in late. Perhaps BioWare was worried players wouldn't remember the child from the beginning of the game without the reminders. That might be true, but their solution is to make the opening scene more impactful, not force in these pointless dreams. Another one of the memes doing the rounds takes the Mass Effect ending and considers how it would play out in Lord of the Rings, in an attempt to show how stupid it is. Instead of destroying the ring, Frodo would have the option to control evil, merge good and evil, or destroy evil plus all dwarves die. Again, despite being an old man by YouTuber standards, I do understand that memes are jokes. However, this seems to have come from a serious place and is used to constantly critique the ending of Mass Effect 3. To state the obvious, the comparison is largely nonsense. The instead of destroying the ring bit doesn't work because one of the options in Mass Effect 3 is to destroy the Reapers, which is the equivalent of destroying the ring. Similarly, merging synthetics and organics isn't the same as merging good and evil. If you think that, then you've misunderstood huge chunks of what Mass Effect is all about. And the destroy evil plus all dwarves die thing is just odd. I get that it's supposed to be an exaggeration, but it's a bit silly. The best part, however, is the option for Frodo to use the ring to control evil. This is supposed to be mocking Mass Effect by showing how ridiculous that would be in Lord of the Rings, but that's a fairly big part of the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Frodo continuously wrestles with the desire to use the ring himself. How do you miss that? The final complaint I'll address is the lack of a big boss battle. There was a boss fight at the end of the first 2 games, so I guess the expectation of another one makes sense, although to me Mass Effect was always about conversation and choices. So a final conversation and then a big choice seems like a fitting end to the series. I've addressed these common disputes not to tell people they're wrong, not entirely anyway, but to show why I don't hate the ending. None of these common criticisms really sit right with me, and given that this has been a hot button issue for 7 years now, it would have been silly to not address them. And I admit in part it was to preempt some of the inevitable comments I will undoubtedly get in response to a defence of the ending. I guarantee you, despite having directly addressed it, I will still get people telling me that the ending doesn't make sense because Shepard proved that synthetics and organics could live in peace. After Mass Effect 2, BioWare's reputation was higher than ever, and many fans of the developer simply refused to believe BioWare could make such a mess of things. This gave rise to the indoctrination theory, which let people cling on to the belief that things were not as they seemed, and that Mass Effect 3 actually had a hidden ending for those prepared to dig in and examine all the evidence. As a high-level summary, the indoctrination theory goes like this. The Reapers indoctrinated Shepard on Earth at the beginning of the game. The child she sees isn't real, it's a creation of the Reapers. That's why the intelligence takes the form of this child at the end. After Shepard is hit by the Reaper beam in the final charge, everything from that point on is in her head as she fights for control against the Reapers. I'm not entirely clear how this all actually ends. Is an indoctrinated Shepard still allowed to make the key decision, or is all that fictitious? Theorists get a bit vague around here. It's certainly a cool theory. Secret endings and alternative readings are always fascinating. As discussed, indoctrination was one of the core themes of the Mass Effect trilogy, from Saran to Thorians in the first game all the way through to the end with the Elusive Man. However, the theory doesn't stand up to scrutiny. Perhaps the biggest mark against it is just a quick application of Occam's razor. What's more likely, that BioWare, under a huge time crunch to get the game finished, made a mess of the ending which it later padded out with an extended version which supports that original ending? Or BioWare, in a huge game published by EA and marketed to the masses, decided to hide the ending with vague and unprovable references that only a minority of people would pick up on. And when you actually think about it, that ending isn't any good either. I'm usually loath to directly reference the work of other creators, but there's a video by Game Theory discussing the indoctrination theory back in April 2017, and to be honest, it's pretty bad. It's full of a bunch of weak links and coincidences or statements that are easily disproven. It has over 3 million views though, so I doubt they will care about a little criticism from a nobody. While the video is nearly 20 minutes long, most of that time is spent recounting events of the trilogy and the anger around the original ending, and there's even a lengthy definition of what indoctrination is. It's mind control. The evidence listed is easily picked apart. There's a lot of focus on the initial appearance of the kid and how no one else sees him. This supposedly makes him a figment of Shepard's imagination. To me, it seems far more likely that no one comments on him because he is otherwise unremarkable, especially given what's going on, or they just didn't see him. At one point, the video states that the kid somehow escaped from a confined space when in the vent, as if by magic.
During the air duct scene, your mentor Admiral Anderson calls the Shepard, and when you look back, poof, the kid has disappeared. Mysterious how the kid pulled a David Blaine and escaped so quickly from a confined space.
I mean, sure, that's one way to look at it. The other is that he just moved around the corner out of sight. And then supposedly it's weird that none of the soldiers helped the kid onto the ship despite helping everyone else. To me, it looks a lot like they continue to provide covering fire until the kid is on the ship, and then give the ship the go-ahead to take off, specifically once the kid is safely on board. Then there's the suspicious sounds. A Reaper is heard screeching once the child disappears, which is compared to the noise made when a Reaper fails to indoctrinate Paul Grayson in the novel Retribution. It's not easy to compare these sounds made in a game to those described in a book, however the references to a vague screeching noise are hardly conclusive. It's also worth noting that in the book Paul Grayson was under Reaper control. Sometimes he was able to wrench back control for brief periods of time, but he had already been well and truly indoctrinated by the Reapers. It's not correct to say that they screeched when they failed to indoctrinate him. The video then suggests that the noise the Reapers make is infrasound, which we know is the sound used to control people through indoctrination. I'm happy to admit that this supports the theory, although again, if we take the more obvious reason, it's easier to accept that BioWare wanted the robots to make noise because it would be weird if they were completely silent, and so they used the noise that Reapers are known to make. Reapers would also presumably be trying to indoctrinate people on Earth, so of course they would be using infrasound. But sure, it's certainly possible that the infrasound is there to indoctrinate Shepard, who we know the Reapers see as the threat. The next part involves the dream sequences, where Shepard chases after images of the kid while surrounded by black shadows. Apparently the black shadows are also evidence of Reaper indoctrination and not just, vague shadows. The evidence for this is that the Rachni at one point describe the noise they hear from the Reapers as oily black. However, the Rachni also describe it as a sour yellow note, but this isn't acknowledged because it doesn't support that part of the theory. Yellow makes more sense because this is the colour of infrasound on the sound frequency. Darkness is also used as shorthand for evil. It's best not to read too much into some shadows in a dream. The video saves the best for last though. It ends by saying that all the concrete evidence that will conclusively prove the indoctrination theory once and for all is coming in a future video.
Because now it's time to tackle the ending. Up to this point, we've only looked at evidence seeded throughout other parts of the series, but where it all comes crashing down is in the final hour of the game, where Shepard gets hit with sky beams, has heart-to-heart talks with Potter puppet pal versions of key figures in his life, and ultimately gets bored to death by our good buddy Hoodie McBiscuit. Only now, he's a hologram. Like Tupac. But for now, the editors are giving me a really dirty look to wrap things up, since doing any video over 15 minutes puts a lot of stress on them, so hold tight, my theorists, more Mass Effect is on the way.
2 years later, that video still hasn't arrived, so I guess we'll just have to take his word for it. As much as I would love there to be a hidden ending to Mass Effect 3, one hinted at throughout the trilogy which rewards further research from its most devoted fans, there simply isn't one. Or at least that's my theory. My game theory. While on the topic of alternative endings, you might have seen the talk of dark energy and a rewrite after an early script was leaked. These are two separate things that are often conflated when they shouldn't be. A script did get leaked, but the ending didn't revolve around dark energy and it wasn't rewritten. The leaked ending is substantially the same as the one we got. Drew Karpyshyn has stated that one of the ideas for the ending involved dark energy, which is substance created by the use of Element Zero and part of Mass Effect fields themselves. Under this ending, the reason for the Reaper invasion would have been completely different. Long ago, the Reapers detected a huge mass of dark energy heading towards the Milky Way. This dark energy would destroy the entire galaxy, and the Reapers had no way to stop it. In order to stop the dark energy, the Reapers decided to harvest all intelligent life every 50,000 years, in the hope that the combined intelligence of all those different species would help them find a solution before it was too late. There are a few references to dark energy in Mass Effect 2, although not in the context of a load of it threatening to wipe out life in the galaxy. Karpyshyn left BioWare after Mass Effect 2, so fans latched onto this as the intended ending that was then ruined by the people who took over. This is another one of those things that can be attributed to the huge popularity of Mass Effect 2. When you love one game and see that the main writer left, it's easy to blame all subsequent failures on that change of personnel. However, that's really not fair. Karpyshyn stated that dark energy was one of the possible endings they were working with. All this shows is that the writers didn't have a fixed ending in place while working on Mass Effect 2. This is incredibly disappointing. I can perhaps understand the ending being a work in progress during the first game, but after the success of Mass Effect 1, the writing team really should have nailed down an ending and worked towards it in the sequel. With hindsight, it's obvious there was no resolution in sight. That's why there's so little major story development in Mass Effect 2. I really wish more thought was put into endings from the very start, however the risky nature of the video game industry makes this tricky. The odds of any one game getting a second sequel are remote, so it's understandable that developers focus on getting something out there and worrying about the details later. So should BioWare have stuck with the dark energy theory? At first I preferred this ending, vague as it is, to the ending we got, but with hindsight I'm not convinced it would have worked. Certainly not as the conclusion to a trilogy. Think about how it would have played out. Once the Reapers reveal the truth, what happens next? There's no way the problem can be solved in this one game, that would be a complete cop-out. The Reapers have been looking for a solution for millions of years and have harnessed the power of countless civilizations. Why would Shepard suddenly have a solution? A Deus Ex Machina of epic proportions would be required. By the way, as an aside, the ending to Mass Effect 3 isn't a Deus Ex Machina, although it's often described as such. I get why. The ending involves an almost literal god coming out from a machine and presenting Shepard with a choice. It almost exactly fits the definition, a god from a machine. However, a traditional Deus Ex Machina is more about a sudden and highly contrived solution that comes out of nowhere. While the specifics of the ending reveal are a surprise, that doesn't make it a Deus Ex Machina. The Crucible and the Catalyst were huge parts of the story for the entire game, and the only doubt was exactly how it would work. Being able to use the Crucible to destroy the Reapers was actually the expected solution, so it's not sudden and contrived. Anyway, the only way I can see the Dark Energy story working is if it's revealed at the end but not solved into a future game. This would obviously not be a satisfying way to end a trilogy, but would be acceptable if there were plans to continue the story into future games. But what then? How do you fight Dark Energy? Who would be the bad guys? Was Dark Energy created by another force, or is it a natural occurrence? If it's natural, you have no one to fight unless you rely on indoctrination again. If it was created, then you need to fight the entity that created it in the first place and preferably come up with a reason for that entity creating it, which pretty much puts you back in the same position you were with explaining the Reapers. I'm not saying it's impossible to use this theory as a satisfying conclusion, but I do believe it would have just pushed the problems further down the line, and made the whole thing even harder to solve later on. I've spent a lot of time defending the current ending, but I want to repeat that I don't love it. I think it works and it's fine, but it's not great. My main issue is that the entire thing revolves around some incredibly unlikely coincidences concerning the Crucible. All stories rely on coincidences, and if you start overthinking these, it can drive you absolutely insane. Even with that in mind, Mass Effect 3's ending pushes the boundaries of acceptability, especially when you consider the scale of events, both temporal and geographical. The Reapers couldn't have been defeated without the Crucible. Information about the Crucible was lying dormant on Mars for the past 50,000 years, and we happened to find it just in time to get it built. Likewise, we found the catalyst at pretty much the last possible moment. The Crucible was the work of many cycles who passed the information down to the next, who then made slight improvements and passed it on themselves until the current cycle managed to merge it with the catalyst. How did the information get passed down each time? Presumably it had to be hidden well enough that the Reapers never found it, but not so well that future species wouldn't find it. On each occasion it wasn't found early enough to stop the Reapers. Did every cycle discover it at the last minute like we did? If you start thinking about how unlikely all this is, the entire thing comes apart. Other issues are more attributable to poor execution than plot holes as such. As discussed, although indoctrination is a constant theme throughout the trilogy, it's never really given a satisfying conclusion. It's just one of the Reaper's powers and is used to control the elusive man and make Cerberus a pain to deal with. The whole preservation and harvesting thing feels completely tacked on. Why do the Reapers need to harvest so many people to preserve them? Wouldn't it just be easier to take the DNA from a few people? It's not like they're harvesting our memories or history, not as far as I can tell. This isn't like Brainiac keeping civilizations in jars. There's also reference to the harvested people being used to create new Reapers, but this is also not explored fully. Why do all these new Reapers look like the old ones, even though when the Collectors harvested humans in Mass Effect 2, the resulting Reaper looked like a human? While I said that Mass Effect 3 didn't need to end with a boss battle, I strongly suspect that a big fight against Harbinger was originally planned. Harbinger was the first Reaper and was a significant presence in Mass Effect 2. He's the Reaper defending the beacon that transports Shepard to the Citadel, so I expect the original plan was to have you fight him first, and that was cut for time. The decision at the end of Mass Effect 2 about whether to keep the Collector technology doesn't seem to have played a role at all, which is disappointing. Finally, the ending should have been foreshadowed better. Even if we accept that there wasn't a plan for the ending when the first two games were in development, that doesn't excuse the lack of clues in this one. It wouldn't have taken a lot of work. There could have been a mission that uncovered evidence of a previous synthetic race that nearly wiped out all organic life, which would then give support to the Intelligence's plan. Yes, we have the example of the Geth, but we also repair that relationship, and as we've seen, this then leads people to the opposite conclusion that in fact the Reapers were wrong. Oh, and let's not forget the terrible epilogue set in the future, which is so cringe-inducing and unnecessary, I can't even bring myself to talk about it. Perhaps the most damning thing about Mass Effect 3 was that so much important and enjoyable content was carved out for DLC. I can't find definitive evidence to support whether this was a BioWare decision, an EA one, or a bit of both. I suspect EA insisted on DLC, but as to whether it had to be so crucial to the experience is debatable. There are 4 pieces of DLC. I would only describe one of them as optional, and that's Omega. In Omega you work with Aria T'Loak to take Omega back from Cerberus. It's relatively run-of-the-mill content, fighting in the same sort of indoor environments you're well used to at this point. A new enemy type known as Adjutants is hyped up to be some big unstoppable threat, and there are some tense moments where you explore dark rooms via flashlight. However, in the end the Adjutants are a complete pushover and not even a threat in large numbers. Story-wise, we learn a little more about Cerberus's attempts to create a race of superhumans via Reaper tech, but it's not especially important. The boss is disappointing, relying on the well-worn cliche of playing chess to show that he's strategic before just giving up at the end. I enjoyed getting to fight alongside Aria, who I'd spent time with in the books as well as the games. She gets a couple of good moments, such as storming into Afterlife, however there are also a bunch of annoying bugs to deal with that slightly spoil the experience. I'd say it's worth playing just to see more of Omega outside of the official districts, but you can feel free to skip it. The rest of the DLC is borderline essential, including on-disc DLC called From Ashes. It's a bit late to get into the ethics of pre-order DLC, and you probably know my opinion on it. From Ashes sees you head back to Eden Prime from the very beginning of Mass Effect 1, where you eventually uncover a Prothean who has been in stasis for the last 50,000 years. You can see the climactic battle as the Protheans are wiped out by the Reapers. There's some great footage here, and I loved getting a few glimpses of Prothean society, but the big part is that Javik, the Prothean you awaken from status, can join your team for the rest of the game. He was one of my favourite companions and gives you a bunch of insight into Prothean society. Liara spent most of her life studying the Protheans, and there's plenty of questions for Javik, although she doesn't like all the answers. Turns out the Protheans weren't great people. Protheans saw themselves as more sophisticated and therefore better than all the other species. They undoubtedly acted like dictators at times. Troublesome revelations aside, Javik is a surprisingly funny member of the crew to have around, as he comes to terms with the races he used to consider primitive suddenly leading the charge against the Reapers.
I find what primitives lack in aim, they make up for in ammunition.
50,000 years ago, humans, the Asari and the Hanar were spared by the Reapers because they weren't developed enough. Likewise the Rachni, although that one's a little weird because Javik says that the Rachni were a formidable foe even back then, which suggests they were vaguely sophisticated. It was also interesting to discover that the Protheans ultimately lost their fight against the Reapers due to the activities of a Prothean splinter group that worked against the Protheans after being indoctrinated by the Reapers. In other words, it was the Prothean equivalent of Cerberus. Of course, Javik conveniently can't help with any of the big issues like identifying the catalyst because he was a military guy. It's a shame Vigil, the Prothean AI back on Ios, didn't mention this, come to think of it. Perhaps the most annoying part of this being DLC is that Javik would have served as an excellent way to introduce new Mass Effect players to the world. Javik has a good reason for not knowing what the hell is going on, so if new players are confused they could just let Javik ask a bunch of questions and have Shepard explain it. James fills this role a little, but he's so dull you won't want to listen to him any more than you have to. I've already discussed the Leviathan DLC where you meet survivors of the race that created the intelligence in the first place. This simply had to be part of the base game. It changes the nature of the ending to one of complete shock to one of gradual understanding. You also need to play it because it stars Alan Dale, aka Jim Robinson from Neighbours and Caleb Nichol from the OC, plus other stuff as well, but those are the important ones. Finally, there's the infamous Citadel DLC where you get the rare opportunity to go on a big mission with your entire crew and eventually come face to face with your clone. It sounds silly as hell, but it's fun silly, and if you've read the comics it isn't quite so out of left field. Things kick off when Shepard tries to have a casual bit of shore leave, which is interrupted by an attack on the restaurant. There's a new character called Agent Brooks who befriends Shepard before it's revealed that she works with the clone. Brooks used to work for Cerberus and tracked down the clone's body after Cerberus decided to dispose of it. You still only have 2 companions fighting in the field with you, but there are loads of returning faces who help out on the sides, a bit like at the end of Mass Effect 2. The Citadel DLC also has some great jokes and moments of light relief that would have been welcome in the main story. There's Shepard noticing a couple of her annoying quirks when she comes face to face with her clone.
I should go.
I am tired of being locked in time capsules.
She said I should go. Do I sound like that?
Yes. Yes, you do.
Maybe we should be worrying about the impregnable vault we've been sealed inside forever?
How come nobody told me about this before? I'm open to feedback here.
You should never announce your plan. Even when leaving a conversation, it shows weakness.
Yeah, probably not a lot of air in here either. An hour tops.
Maybe it's I should go. I should go. I should go.
Shepard, we're in kind of a situation here.
Some perfect comedic timing with the arrival of a pizza.
Then we'll find our own way in. Gear up and let's... What's with the Volus?
Oh, pizza delivery guy. I got the munchies.
Double pepperoni.
And a surprising third way to use a vibrating toothbrush.
Manual lock, and it's only meant to be opened from the other side. Any ideas?
We can't hack it. We need a very precise Mass Effect field to get it from out here.
If you told me this morning that a toothbrush was going to save the Normandy, I'd have been very skeptical.
On a more random note, Anderson gives you his huge apartment to live in, which you can lightly customise with furniture of your choice, and there are a bunch of arcade games to play and even a virtual combat suite to practice in and chase high scores. There's a few silly side missions as well, such as making a film with Javik and taking part in one last battle with Jack. The most memorable bit is of course the party you throw for your entire crew, past and present. Again, it's all pretty tongue-in-cheek, but it absolutely works. My favourite moment was probably Trainer and Edie discussing how Trainer used to find Edie's voice sexually attractive, while Tali nearly kills herself in an attempt to change the subject.
What's wrong, you two?
I am asking Specialist Trainer about why she found my voice sexually attractive.
Oh, really?
Oh, shut up. I hadn't even met you yet.
This is a really good cheese, Shepard. I put some in through the filters. Is it organic?
On one occasion, you said that you wanted to, quote, pin my voice against the wall and run your tongue along its collarbone.
Well, there's a context there that... you were talking about quantum entanglement, and I didn't know you were an AI.
There's some kind of herb in the cheese that I can't quite place. Is it sage or basil?
Anyway, I was just joking. You know, stress of the retrofits and...
Really? My diagnostics suggested that you were genuinely aroused.
It's really rare to get herbed dextro cheeses. The Turians almost never bother.
You have diagnostics. Cerberus programmed you to check body language.
I get more reliable results measuring pupil dilation and thermal readings of erogenous zones.
Oh, good lord.
Wait, this is dextro cheese, right? Keela, did I forget to scan the cheese? This is why I don't drink. Don't mind me, I'm just going to run a toxin treatment program, so I don't die.
It's absolutely brilliant, and even though it doesn't fit in at the end, it is great as the last thing you do in the game. Mass Effect 2 and 3 have some excellent DLC, and yet much of it fits awkwardly into the overall experience, and goes to show just how tricky DLC is as a concept. The layer of the Shadow Broker content was great and yet largely ignored story-wise in 3. The Arrival was far too important to the events of Mass Effect 3 to have been optional DLC. The Citadel DLC suffers from the common problem DLC has of not quite fitting in with the broader narrative. This content is clearly intended as a way to say goodbye to former friends, but of course it has to be completed prior to the end of the main story. You then have this weird disconnect where you're off on adventures and having parties with the Reaper threat still looming in the background. Speaking of your crew, they definitely play a smaller role this time around. You have fewer crew members, no big loyalty missions to speak of, and with the exception of Javik, none of the new characters are especially interesting. BioWare consistently struggles to write male human characters with Kaidan in 1, Jacob in 2 and James in 3, and even Liam in Andromeda. The best companion moments are those shared with people from Mass Effect 2, such as Jack at Grissom Academy, Mordin and Rex. Given the lack of focus on companions this time around, it's easy to see why those who loved Mass Effect 2 would be disappointed with Mass Effect 3. Personally, I appreciated the more focused narrative in Mass Effects 1 and 3, which means that ultimately Mass Effect 2 is my least favourite of the series. They all have their strengths and weaknesses. The world building in Mass Effect 1 is unrivaled. Playing it is a little rough, but there's no way people would have been drawn into this world with such a passion if it weren't for the groundwork laid in the first game. It's a masterpiece of world building or galaxy building or whatever you want to call it. Mass Effect 2 has the strongest content outside of the main story and lets you develop relationships with companions which then come to fruition in the third game. Mordin's sacrifice wouldn't have meant anywhere near as much if it weren't for Mass Effect 2, and meeting Jack would have been largely meaningless. However, the main story campaign is terrible and did nothing to help set up the finale, ultimately leaving the final game with far too much work to do. Mass Effect 3 has by far the best combat, however the narrow structure of the main campaign means there's little to no exploration, and level design can get tedious. Mass Effect 3 also has the most cinematic moments, however this doesn't always work in the game's favour. At times it feels like they're trying too hard to create those moments. If you let yourself be taken along for the ride then you might not notice it, but my second playthrough showed up a lot of issues. For example, near the beginning you need to defend against waves of enemies while waiting for your ship. Even though I was playing on an easier difficulty the second time, this section just went on and on and on. I had no ammo and had to kill everyone with biotic powers. Or at least I thought I had no ammo. Turns out I had 2 bullets left on another gun and the second I used them the mission ended. Yeah, it's timed for when you run out of bullets just to make it more dramatic. Shortly after there's a section where you chase Eva, but it's impossible to kill her early, and she ignores all your biotic powers. This is all to set up a scene where James crashes a ship into her escape vehicle, which then leads to a slow motion shootout. Then there's the turret sections. There's a few of these, but I didn't mind in my first playthrough. They aren't that long, so they don't detract from the experience much, although they certainly don't add anything to it either. On the second playthrough I had to walk away during a turret section and didn't pause the game properly. I came back about 5 minutes later to find a few husks surrounding Garrus and James shooting at and missing, one of them just a few feet from him. These attempts to create drama reminded me a bit of Uncharted games. As long as you roll with it, these scenes can look intense and make it feel like you're in a movie. However, if you happen to die or not do exactly as the game wants, it all falls apart. I hate the idea of ranking these games because they are so incredibly different. However, at a push, I would go 1, 3, 2. Really though, it's the collective whole that I love. The world of Mass Effect is a remarkable achievement. At times during the third game, I found myself in complete awe at what a great job BioWare had done with this world over 3 games. There were optional side stories that I was more invested in than most main questlines, and even background characters that you couldn't interact with directly gave you a reason to care. Mostly the scope of this world hit home with the books. There are 4 in total, all following Kaylee Sanders with a healthy dose of Captain Anderson as well. The first book takes place around 20 years before the first game, the second is just before Mass Effect 2, and the third and fourth are just before Mass Effect 3. While the books are linked to the main story, there's barely any mention of Shepard, and the books manage to stand on their own. They remind me of Star Wars Expanded Universe novels and the new ones that are officially canon. The hard work was done by the games, or in the case of Star Wars, the movies, but with the universe in place, there's plenty of room for more stories. Star Wars lived on for years without new movies, and Mass Effect could have as well. This is no coincidence. Let's face it, comparisons between Star Wars and Mass Effect aren't an accident. BioWare knew the Star Wars universe well after making Knights of the Old Republic games, and with Mass Effect they essentially made their own version, complete with the space magic. While discussing the books, I should add an important caveat. Like the Star Wars Expanded Universe, there are some terrible entries. Most of the comics are bland for a start, and the 4th book, Deception, is absolutely terrible. Karpyshyn wrote the first 3 books but was replaced by William C. Dietz for the final one after moving to Disney. The good news is that you don't really need to read the final book, and I highly recommend you don't bother. It's an unnecessary epilogue and a bad one at that. There are a bunch of issues with the book, from just generally bad writing, lore inconsistencies, pacing, and a lack of any conflict at all. However, the biggest issue is just how dry the entire thing is. None of the characters have any personality, including the ones who are already established in previous books. I'm going to spoil major parts of the book now, but I think it's worth it to emphasise just how bad the book is. Deception is mainly focused on Kaylee and Anderson trying to track down Gillian and Nick, both of whom are human biotics that we know from the previous books. Gillian wants to kill the elusive man as revenge for him experimenting on her father, Paul Grayson. Nick is just a grumpy kid. Gillian and Nick are about 18, but Kaylee and Anderson are looking after them along with Gillian's former teacher, a man called Hendel, whom Kaylee is also close to. Gillian and Nick go missing under separate circumstances and both end up at Omega. On the one hand, Kaylee and Anderson are really worried about them because Omega is a dangerous place and they're both still young, but on the other hand they don't exactly rush off. Before leaving to find them, they go for a fancy meal at a nice restaurant and have sex. This lack of any urgency is indicative of the entire book. Gillian and Nick both become murderers without giving it a second thought. There's little in the way of internal conflict about the morality of killing, they just do it and move on. At the end, Nick kills Hendel. Kaylee's reaction to this murder of a character who's been in most of the books and is a close friend of hers is a simple, quote, "I'm sorry to hear that. Hendel was a fine man and he deserved better," close quote. Shortly after, both Nick and Gillian die. Kaylee's reaction to Gillian's death is borderline comical. She bites her lower lip and says, "Damn, damn, damn." Anderson adds, "What a waste." That's it. That's the reaction to the death of the kid that Kaylee taught for years and was looking for the entire book. Deception is one of the most soulless and boring books I've ever read, but the other 3 are worth reading. I desperately want to see the Mass Effect series return both with books and games. Obviously ignore Andromeda, which is what BioWare should have done. Ironically, the intense negative reaction to the ending of Mass Effect 3 is probably why we have Andromeda. Following up Mass Effect 3 with a direct sequel would have meant picking a canon ending, and I'm sure BioWare didn't want to reignite that rage again. Hell, I'm tempted to go further and say that the outrage towards Mass Effect 3 is one of the reasons video game storytelling as a whole has shifted to lore dumps. Why would any developer bother trying to tell an excellent story if the fan base is going to get angry and ignore the previous 100 hours because they were disappointed with the final 15 minutes? It's hard to find anyone talk positively about Mass Effect 3 without qualifying it by reference to the ending. Mass Effect 3 is an excellent game, and the trilogy as a whole tells a bunch of fantastic stories, but that just seems to be largely forgotten. With lore, you can just dump information in the codex without going to any effort to tell a consistent narrative. If you make a mistake, you can easily change the text. No one cares if the ending to any story is bad because there's a roadmap of future content which will expand on it anyway. It's far too rare for a story in a video game to actually end, and is it really all that surprising? Developers with artistic vision who want to tell a fixed story are putting a target on their back when time and time again, gamers have shown that they are just as happy for there to be no story in the game at all, so long as they have lore. After completing this video series, I'm more invested in the world of Mass Effect than ever before. I've read all the books and comics centred around the trilogy, and if a new book was announced, I'd be almost as excited as I would be for a new game, depending on the author of course. In fact, I'd probably take a new trilogy of books by a half-decent author over a new series of games from the current iteration of BioWare. And with that, it's about time to wrap up this video on Mass Effect 3 and the entire series. I can't express how glad I am that I played these games again, or for the first time in the case of Mass Effect 1. With mods, DLC and enhanced endings, the entire trilogy is still incredibly rewarding to play. If, like me, you skipped the first game, I strongly recommend going back and playing it if possible. I know there are a ridiculous number of games out there demanding ever increasing amounts of your time, but playing through this trilogy is a far better experience than most of those time sinks. Give yourself a little reminder of what good storytelling looks like. Okay, I hope you enjoyed the video. I'd settle for you not completely hating it actually. Please consider hitting like, sharing the video in the appropriate places and subscribing if you haven't already. I also have a Patreon, so if you'd like to support the channel financially, you can get your name in the credits and a Patreon role in my Discord server for $1 a month. As for future content, I expect the next big video will be a critique of Metro Exodus, and then my retrospective on Baldur's Gate 2. In the meantime, I hope to sprinkle in a few smaller reviews of current games I'm playing or want to play. This will be a mixture of big games like Devil May Cry 5, Division 2 and Sekiro, plus a bunch of indies. I also have this very silly and not at all confirmed idea of doing another video on Mass Effect Andromeda, maybe modding it up and revisiting it with the original trilogy fresh in my mind. Let me know what you think of that in the comments. I have plans for a few other series of video critiques, but I'd rather not commit to them until I have the first video out. Alright, until next time, cheers.